Hi everyone, sorry about that, just some technical difficulties. Thank you for joining us on Community Heart Media and Northwest FM. Mark, hopefully your IT issues are now sorted as well.
Well, it's good to see everyone here on 98.9 Northwest FM, and it's going to be a great night, just overcoming a few IT problems, and we're live. Gee, it's great, Cal, to be a bit live in the studio. I think everything's working, everything seems to be going okay.
Thank goodness for that. And it's such an important show. We had so many community members who wanted to come on air to discuss this. And we just want to, first of all, just thank everyone who is from the land of the Wurundjeri country and the Kulin Nations and pay respects to them. And to welcome two guests tonight. First of all, we have Deb. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Hello. Deb, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Deb Chapman. I'm part of a small group of women doing actions mostly around Marybeck area, but on Wurundjeri land. We're called Sewing Sisters, living together on stolen land. And it comprises of Dr. Sue Lopez-Atkinson, who's Yorta Yorta, Eileen Traynor, who's a Uruguayan-American woman, and myself, Anglo-Australian settler heritage.
Well, it's great to have you here, Deb. And Wurundjeri country, I'm on Wurundjeri country as well, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And it's great to be here just to talk a bit about, Indigenous issues, First Nation issues, a lot to talk about, obviously. And so the Sewing Sisters, hey, did that come from a love of sewing or a love of sisterhood, or where did it all come from?
Great question, Mark. It's got a few antisense, is that the word? A few places that it comes from. We have developed a small course, 6-part course that is looking at anti-racism issues through a First Nations lens, and we call Auntie Sue has developed a lot of that, and we call it Speak to Self, Speak to Others. So the SOO, that was part of our sowing. We're also sowing seeds of conversation and change, and we also, I don't know if you can see this book. It's by Amberlyn Quamelina. It's a little book called Living on Stolen Land, and was published by Mugaballa Books a few years ago. And it's a really, it's a great little snippet of issues that we should be thinking about as non-Indigenous people in this land, working with Indigenous people, and we love it. And so with respect and acknowledgement, we have used this as well to convey the fact that we're living on stolen land together.
Well, we might go through some of those issues. That so the sewing group, what are we sewing? Shirts, jumpers. What can we imagine is coming out of this sewing group?
Well, if any of the listeners are interested, we manage the Facebook page called Marybeck Allyship Network, and we've been going for a few years. We have moved on from thinking about reconciliation, and we used to be called the Moreland Reconciliation Network, and of course with Moreland changing its name to Marybeck, and with us thinking through the lack of impact really that reconciliation's had, we've moved more our focus and our analysis and our activities to looking at anti-racism with a First Nations lens. So you
just said there something interesting. The reconciliation, you reckon, hasn't had any impact, or not much impact, or not enough impact?
Yes. And look, I guess one of the things I'm interested to talk with and engage with people about is that cultural awareness and cultural understanding of our First Nations people, and this is me talking as a white Anglo-Euro settler background, it's not enough for me because it doesn't address the power imbalance, the dispossession, the history of this land. And so whilst it's really important that we have an understanding of the amazing range and depth of cultures in this so-called land called Australia, to me, it hasn't moved far enough, and it doesn't enable white Australians to take enough responsibility for changing the way in which we set up systems that are dysfunctional and harmful for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
I completely agree, Deb. I think I was speaking to you last week organising this show, and also our other guest joining us later, Marianne. And I, obviously, people can tell my strong accent. When I first came here to Australia, one of the things that I really acknowledged was going, wow, in New Zealand, Māori Pacific culture is very much enriched and embedded throughout society. I work in communications and engagement, and it's one of the first things that we always acknowledge when we're doing a presentation. It's about how we are welcoming the Māori people. It's about the translations. It's about all the material that we're presenting to our community members, but not even just to our community members, but to in every aspect, in terms of our land as well, in terms of how we celebrate things, in terms of street signs. And when I came here, I was like, wow, we don't do that. I was really surprised, really surprised.
And yet you also hear stories of, North Americans being surprised when we do acknowledgements before we start things. There's a lot of things we can learn from Aotearoa, and there's a lot of differences as well, because of course we had over 230, Marianne's not here, but over 230 Aboriginal nations in this country before settlement. And, there's, I think, at least 38 traditional owner groups in Victoria, in the land of Victoria alone, what we call the state of Victoria. So from what I understand, even for the diversity of language, Te Māori is a different, is the main language for most Māori people, where for Aboriginal communities, there's huge diversity. So that's
true.
A strength. It's quite different.
Very good point. Yeah, very good point. Very good point.
But I think, we haven't had a treaty with our First Nations people anywhere in this country. And, there's analysis of the treaty in New Zealand about, the strengths and weaknesses of that. But we need to be learning from that in Australia about how we do that.
Yeah, completely agree. So, Deb, what brought you to, and sorry, with these IT issues, just missed, your introduction, but what brought you to where you are as part of the group that you belong to, and with the many other sisters as well?
That's we've all come from different places, I suppose.
That's good. That's good.
Yes. And we the three of us do things together. So Eileen and Sue know what I'm doing tonight, and I don't like to speak for them, but I also want to make sure their voices are heard. So Sue and I actually met at council on a council reconciliation group probably about 10 years ago now, and split at that time, and and I'm not on that group anymore. And then Eileen and I met sort of in doing work with Reconciliation Victoria quite a number of years ago, and we were the three of us were keen to do some local actions and local activities, and we're all a bit pissed. I'm an old community worker, and we're all a bit pissed off with formal organisation. So we have quite consciously not become an organisation. So we occasionally get some small grants or things, and we will use often a neighbourhood house as an auspice, but we are we're not incorporated. And we say, for the three of us, we work with compassionate accountability and radical hope. So when the three of us meet, Auntie Sue guides the actions and the activities and the kind of direction we need to be going in, and Eileen and I try and make that happen it's a very much, our skills are very complementary. And, you know, I'm 65, I've been a community worker for a long time, and it's actually been, I think, one of the most effective ways of working, because we want the work focus to be out there, not on the internal organisation. And we trust each other, and we've built up relationships over a long period of time. We've been working together now for probably 8 years, and we have a kind of a, I don't know, synergy, I suppose, about the way we work together. That means our work is more impactful for the little bit of energy we've got. You know, we've got lives and families and other, you know, other issues going on, and Sue's got a number of health issues going on. So we just do what we can in a way that we think is impactful. And so we like the energy to go out there, not internally navel gazing. Or being accountable to people that we don't want to be accountable to, like, you know, funding bodies.
Yeah, good on you. Good on you.
It sounds like you've got a very good relationship there, Deb. Just our listeners, it's 98.9. It's Community Heart. We'd love to have a comment from you. We're having obviously a few technical problems. If you're listening on the radio, it's a bit patchy. Don't know what it's like on the internet. So if you are listening on the internet, let us know how it's coming through. If there's any issues, let us know on the chat. It would be good to get any questions you've got. Look, there's a lot going on in the Indigenous space, Deb, but I'm really liking some of the community groups that are being proactive. And I went to the Nicky Wynn 30 years of his statement. That was an amazing night. I just loved that. Was one of the best Indigenous things. I don't know whether you were there in Collingwood, but it was just an incredible coming together of Indigenous people and Indigenous culture.
What did that involve, Mark? Talk to us about that.
Eileen was there, our other sewing sister. She was sending me, it was a bit cold and wet that night, I remember, so she was sending me tics of it. But I think also, you know, I grew up on Bunurong land in Frankston girl, born and bred. And I remember, you know, Dad and I walking along the beach saying, you know, whose land is this? And what were Aboriginal people's lives like? This is 60 years ago when I was little. And Dad was really interested, but we found it very difficult to get any information. Where now, of course, we've got internet, but also there's, I think, a renaissance in, is that the right word? There's a plethora of information. There's so many great Black activists writing, producing, acting, playing. You know, most weeks in Melbourne, there's activities on that are, you know, last week we're at the Ballot opening at Glenroy. You know, most weekends there's a lot of much more visible connection to our First Nations country, really, and a much deeper understanding. I mean, there's still, I don't want to polish a turd, but there's still a huge way to go. But it's even, there's just so much more voices coming through, which is, I find very hopeful.
Mark and Deb, what have you seen the shift? Like, what was it like for the both of you growing up here in Australia or in transitioning, as you said, growing up, going to school here, university, work, etc.? What was it like compared to now?
Well, Deb, I'll just quickly answer that. The Indigenous voice, even though we've got a long way to go, it has increased, and the knowledge has increased, and I think the visibility has increased. I still think we've got a long way to go, but it does seem to be, well, it's definitely a lot better than when I was growing up.
What was it like when you grew up, Mark?
Things will continue to get better.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, Mark, but what was it like when you were
growing
up?
I can hear you. Yeah, well, I grew up in the eastern suburbs, and I didn't really have much to do with Indigenous people then. I've now got Indigenous friends, and I connect with Indigenous people. But back there in the eastern suburbs, it just wasn't sort of a going thing. But these days I feel we're a bit more integrated. There's still pockets and people that don't know Indigenous people, but I think it's better. I think we've got a long way to go, but I do think it's better. Deb, what would you think?
Well, I agree. And I think, the fact that we've got how many people in our federal parliament now that are First Nations? I mean, on top of my head, there must be about 8 or 10, probably, quite overtly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's just at the federal government. There's state parliament people too that are much more visible, not that politicians are the bee's knees. And certainly curriculum's improved. You know, I didn't learn very much at all. And, you know, I've got 2 kids in their 20s and they're much more understanding of our true colonial history and the dispossession and genocide that's taken place, that is becoming much better documented and much better known. And those things are important to moving towards a more just world for all of us, really.
Mark and Deb, you both work in the community sector like I do, but what do you think are some of the gaps? You know, where do you think we need to be heading now? And keen to hear from any of our community members and listeners on this point as well, actually.
Mark, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, you go, Deb. You go first.
Well, I think I mentioned it before that cultural awareness is not enough for me anymore. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, you know, the understanding that the systems and the power that we have that drive our society are by and large designed at the worst end, at the best end benign, around centering whiteness, really, and centering white ways of being. So, you know, if you go into a health system and you are, or an education system and you're an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, those places are not necessarily safe and good because they're created with a complete blindness to how it might be different being in this world. So, for example, you know, standards of how children are looked after at home enabled and still enables a lot of stealing of Aboriginal kids from families where, you know, kids might be sharing a bed. Well, that's a cultural thing. You know, it's not necessarily a disadvantage. It can actually be an advantage.
That's a very good point. And we've got one of our listeners here, actually, Sarah. She's I think she's got a really, really good comment. Hi all, thank you for discussing such an important topic. For Deb, what does reconciliation mean for you? What do you believe are some ways this can be implemented?
I think reconciliation has to be about the non-Indigenous community understanding the power bases that they exert and continue to maintain and control that disadvantages Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that, I think, as flawed as it can sometimes be, you know, in Victoria we are having some of those conversations, and to see, you know, the secretaries of a number of departments at the Europe Justice Commission a couple of weeks ago apologising for the way in which the state has been policing Aboriginal bodies is shocking at one level, but also I think leads to really important conversations about who we are as a nation. So the whole conversation in Victoria about what does treaty mean, what does you know, how do we do this truth telling that is legitimate and not just blackwashing, like greenwashing. For me, that struggle, the hope is in the struggle, as Leonard said, you know, like it's actually really important that we start to think about some of those things. And I think that the state's trying to do that. And look,
do you think it's also in regards to, like, sort of serious touches on what do you believe are some of the ways that can be implemented? I think about, like, for my workplace, for example, is one easy thing I can think that we can implement is having those days, like in New Zealand, where we had a lot of that recognition as well. So we had a lot of, like, shared lunches around traditional foods. For myself, who is a non-Australian, I don't know a lot about it. So I want to be educated. I want to be informed. I want to be kept up to date. And so for, you know, and Melbourne, for example, is a very multicultural place. And so for all of us who aren't from Australia, I think we need to be educated a lot across the sector in terms of the healthcare as well, in terms of the history as well. I don't know much about it, to be honest.
Yes, I mean, there's a huge number of ways that can be there, but I don't like relying on people's goodwill.
Mm,
That's not good enough for me.
that's very true.
We need equity and we need social justice in this space, and those things are hard fought for. They don't just come from learning about that cultural awareness is sort of lowest rung level. I'm not saying it's not important, and I think it's really important that non-Indigenous communities have the opportunity to learn those things as well. But we've got to take. For me, I've taken responsibility also for learning, seeing, making sure I read a lot, so I make sure I read a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander writers. I don't just centre, the European kind of canon of writing that we often get, and there's just so much out there. It's pretty easy to be doing that and to be thinking about that.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Deb,
a
do you
really
think
good point.
do you think the voice is going to change things, Deb? Oh, yeah, we've got Marianne's coming in. So we have another visit. Just while Marianne's coming in, well, actually, we might welcome her first. Marianne, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm
we might just put
Marianne moving away from all these fellas here.
I'm just going to put you on mute for a minute, Marianne.
Maybe just take her out for a second until she gets settled, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, Deb, what about the voice? What do you want to say about that? Is that going to help things?
Look, for me, it's a pretty low bar. And I think it creates a lot of unnecessary stress and diverse, divisiveness between and with a whole lot of, there's not one single First Nations understanding of that either, of course, because the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities is diverse the same way the non-Aboriginal community is. For me, it's a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. I don't think I wouldn't vote against it. I won't be going no, but for me, there's parallels with the same-sex marriage debate, that it created a lot of ructions within the gay community. And yes, now gay people can get married, but we've still got demonstrations against drag story time at local libraries. And so have we really shifted an understanding of what it means to be queer in this community? I don't know. It's not enough. It doesn't go far enough for me.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Wow, we just
Marianne, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Where are you at the moment?
Well, I'm just at the Claremont Showgrounds in Perth here. I've been at the IATSIS summit in Perth for the last 3 days now.
And what's that been like, Marianne?
So it's been interesting. Been good conversations. Just with my deadly sister girl Megan Cracker. So we've been in a few workshops where we've had to stand up and just question a few things, but I mean, if we don't speak, there's a lot of things that won't be said. So, but respectfully, but with transparency and openness and honesty, Yeah, so.
Thank you so much for joining us, Marianne. And tell us a bit about who you are and your background and being in Perth.
Well, I'm a Wajak Nyunga Yorga, so Yorga means woman. Wajak Nyunga, is that's my ancestral land, where I've got my physical and spiritual connections. But I go through all nations on Nyunga country, up to Yamaji country, up to Sharks Bay. But first and foremost, I'm a daughter and a mum of 7. I also got a grandson. And so my history is growing up in the land rights movement, always been a part of, fighting for Aboriginal rights since I was a kid. And I'm also a law student, so I'm hoping to graduate next year or the year after.
Wow.
Wow, gee, you've got a lot going on there, Marianne, with seven kids and 1 grandkid, eh? That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I still got 6 at home.
Hey, just on the side.
Yeah,
on the side, just with Megan Cracker, what's she do with herself?
Well, Megan is our director with the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project. So, but Megan's already finished her law degree. So we started our law degrees together years ago, but she finished hers and I kept having babies. So
yeah, I might have met Megan Cracker in a previous life. I think when I was over in Perth, I might have met Megan, believe it or not. It's
well, she's been working. Well, she's been working heaps with the lawyers for the Banksia Hill class action, which is our detention centre in Perth. So a lot of allegations of child abuse and mistreatment. Yeah, not a very good place for our young people.
No, the problem over there in Perth is that too many of you young people are locked up at the prison as well, isn't it? There's Riverview, and what's the name of the big prison over there?
Acacia Prison is a privatised prison. Holds Acacia, about 1,500 prisoners.
Acacia Prison.
And then we have Hakea, which is a remand centre. Remand prison used to be Canning Vale Prison.
Yeah.
And we've got Wooroloo and Carnet, which are prison farms. And we also have Casuarina Maximum Security Prison, where they've created another unit for kids in Banksia Hill who they claim are the violent, bad behaved ones. So, which is just not good.
70% of them are. Is about 70% Aboriginal or more?
Yeah, there's usually 70 to 80% at any one time of our kids in Banksia Hill. And usually about 40 to 50% of them are under the care of the state. So Department of Child Protection is failing our children on all levels.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's a big issue over there, isn't it? And it's a big issue in many parts of Australia, of course, not just in WA, but the Northern Territory. It's a big issue, and even in other states, they're overrepresented in our youth justice centres all across Australia, really.
No, well, that's right. And I think there's about 17 detention centres for our youth right across the country. And WA, which is the largest state, only has one, which is here in the southwest in Perth. So you've got kids from right up north being moved off country, away from families, being housed down here for minor things that they should be providing support, for them up north and keeping them on country with their families and connected to their culture. Yeah,
it's a good point. Yeah.
Marianne, we've sort of been just talking about this evening. How far do you think we've come, and where do you think we need to be heading?
You mean since our lands were invaded, or
but not even
since the '67 referendum? Yeah, so I think that on a serious note, I think that we are a lot more. We've moved a lot more forward than our people in regards to the mission days and things, where our people had basically no rights at all, not even to be able to walk through the city. Our war veterans had no rights. Our people had no rights to practice culture or be on country. So I think we've come a long way from that real kind of ignorance of racism. But I think that we've still got a long way to go, in the sense that our people are still dying in custody at an alarming rate. Suicides have skyrocketed, from young people right to the older people. We've got people homeless everywhere when we live in the richest state and one of the richest countries in the world. We've got children being removed at a far greater rate than when the stolen generation, was happening.
Yeah.
So mental health and social and emotional well-being, so much money is pumped into that area, and yet there's still not enough being done because the right people aren't at the realms of those avenues of funding and those pockets of funding.
I was just going to ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think that's happening?
Because the wrong people are handling the funds. And the wrong people are working in those areas.
Do you live in Perth, or?
I live in Kwinana, which is about half an hour south of Perth. I live in Kwinana, which is about half an hour south of Perth.
Okay.
Yeah, so Kwinana is like a country town.
Well, but Oh, okay, yeah. I spent a bit of time in Belga. Do you know Belga?
Yeah, I grew up in Girraween, which is the next suburb. So a lot of crime, drugs, violence, you know. So
Yeah, a lot of Indigenous people in Belga, hey?
yeah, yep. It was a really high
And
risk
there's a
area
little
for our mob.
Aboriginal. Yeah. Well, I dealt with an organisation called White Lion. I worked with White Lion, and we worked with a few Indigenous organisations as well in the Belga area. There's a lot of people doing some really good work with Indigenous people. There's probably just not enough of it. Is that what you think? We just need more?
Yeah, I know.
Or do
I
you
know
think we're
White Lion.
doing it the wrong way?
I know White Lion. I know White Lion, and they do a lot of good work. You know, so one of my deadly sister girls works for them as well. So, and I've been having a yarn with them to see what we can do, you know, for more of our young ones, so that we can keep them out of that system, you know. Yeah, so they're one of the ones that do a lot of good work. But my issue is that we have so much funding out there, and in particular funding that's directed for Aboriginal organisations, but some of the organisations that are handling a lot of the issues or supposed to be providing support for those issues are not coming with that psychosocial support frame of working, you know. So there's a lot of ignorance, there's a lot of tokenism, and there's also a lot of 9-to-5 people when the work that we do is 24/7. It doesn't stop just because your work day has ended. So we need to have those psychosocial supports funded for and provided for 24/7, because people, and in particular youth, their issues aren't 9-to-5. You know, it can be any time of day.
Yeah, what do you think needs to be implemented?
After hours stuff.
What sort of things do you think needs to be implemented? We were just sort of saying this to Deb as well, Marianne. Like, I totally agree. Needs to be more than 9-to-5. What other suggestions?
Well, the main suggestion I can say, you know, is that there needs to be 24/7 support provided. So a lot of these organisations that are 9-to-5, they need to extend their hours to be a 24/7 service. And there are people that can work the skeleton shift. Like, they have FIFO workers that do night shift and day shift, you know. So I don't see, with the amount of people out there that are struggling to find work, that could be the best mentors and support. You know, people have the ability to be able to work the night shift, you know, and it needs to be more than just a phone service. It needs to be hands-on, driving around, visiting people, going to see people. People should be able to pick up the phone and know that someone can come and support them physically, as well as, you know, providing that nurturing support, because that's a lot of the issues is that, and with these 9-to-5 places, some people don't feel comfortable going into the offices. So there needs to be more outreach, you know, where people are going to the homes, where people who are asking for support are comfortable. You know, they need to have that feeling of being secure to be able to be comfortable, and building relationships where you don't have a caseworker that's changing every 5 minutes. You know, having people that are provided to give that long-term support.
Marianne. What about
because it's just common
employment
sense
side of things? What about getting kids jobs? You're feeling that sort of happening, that Indigenous kids are getting employment or getting a way of finding jobs in that?
Well, that's the problem, because you have a lot of young people that aren't being provided with support to be able to do that kind of stuff. So, for instance, all these kids that are in Banksia Hill, they're not being afforded the proper education that they need, because the government thinks that it's an incentive or it's a privilege to be able to get education or training programs, which is ridiculous. They should be training these kids up so that they can get certificates and get qualifications, so that when they come out, you know, they can go into a traineeship or an on-the-job program where they're being trained, you know, because it's really ridiculous that you've got all of these children that need support, and yet the government aren't making these education and training programs accessible for everyone. And then you've got criminal records that impact on this as well. And this is one of our arguments. You've got all of these men and women coming out of jail with criminal records, and they would make the best mentors and avenues of support for these kids, because they know they've been there, done that. And it can help with them, their own healing and turning their lives around, you know. But criminal records, working with children.
Deb, what do you think about it in terms of what's happening in Victoria with our young people?
Hi, Marianne. I don't know what it's like in Victoria, but I know some great smaller projects. And the other issue about, you know, who gets the funding is we're often stuck in this 1 or 2 year funding cycle. And so the people spend all their time accounting. We lose good people with a great little project that even doesn't need a huge amount of money.
100%.
But then people have got to find jobs and lose money. We need to be funding longer term.
Longer term.
Government politics cycle, really.
100% agree.
Yep.
To all of our listeners and community viewers on Community Heart Media and 98.9, if you've got any comments and questions for Deb and Marianne, we'd love to hear from you. So put a post up online or, just because I think these ladies have some really, really good points and it's such an important topic to cover. Marianne, I was saying to Deb earlier, I'm from New Zealand, and there it's a very different land, it's a very different culture. But the one thing I noticed coming over to Australia was how differently we treat things here. Māori culture, it's very much more embedded over there. The language, the accessibility, like you're talking about. Is there something that you think that we can be implementing here in Australia, learning from Aotearoa?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I just got back from New Zealand a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
And, and while we were over there, we took a brother boy, a Māori brother boy home. He tragically, he'd suicided, 46 years old. So we took him home for his tangi, for his funeral, back to his homelands. And while we were there, we travelled from west to east and back to west of the North Island, because we flew into Auckland and we were staying in Hamilton, and we travelled all over, you know. And what I found really beautiful was while we were there, because there was a whole group of us, about 11 of us, while we were over there, there were 5 of us Nyungas, and the rest was all our Māori brothers and sisters that live in Australia, you know. And we got to visit Māori schools, and we got to see how immersed they are in culture, full language being spoken, and just how good the kids were. Like, they were so embedded in their culture and so grounded, that I was saying to our brother boys and sister girls, you know, like, this is what we need in Australia. Like, these kids, you know, like, they are so settled and grounded, and just how proud they are to speak their culture, you know, sing all their songs, you know, and all the dances and everything. And it was just beautiful. And we went to so many different maraes, you know, seeing everyone over there. And that's something that's really important. You know, the government, they are the ones that dispossessed our lands and have us having to fight back for what they stole from us and took from us. And I think that, you know, I don't believe in reconciliation, it's conciliation. Because to reconcile is to go back to a good relationship, which we never had. So the government need to reconcile with their own history and be honest, because white Australia has a black history. But they also need to conciliate with us and, you know, give us the freedom, you know, to be able to bring back and revitalise everything that they stole and took, you know, because we are the ones that know what's best for us. But they have a lot of laws that infringe on our cultural rights, and that's what needs to be reformed.
100% agree. And that's really good to hear that when you went over to New Zealand, you know, the things that you took away and how embedded it was. That's really good to hear. We've got
it was a beautiful journey, even though it was an emotional trip for us, you know. After the tangi and our brother boy was, you know, settled at the Urapa and we got to hang out, it was one of the most beautiful spiritual journeys that I'd ever been on in my life. And it's something I'll never forget.
Oh, that's so good. So good to hear. We've got a question from one of our listeners here. What kind of supports programs in schools do you think are needed for children and young people to stay in schools and education? Really good question.
Well, I think that's something that they need to talk to the kids about that are affected. because at the end of the day, our kids are the ones that know why they're not concentrating at school, or they're not staying at school, or they don't want to participate in that environment, and so I think that that's something that the government and people who want to provide supports, they need to talk to the kids directly. Because I know with my own daughter, she just got sick of the education system and she went to the alternative education through SMILE, which is our South Metropolitan Youth Link, and she graduated year 12 from there. Because the school system and the curriculum, the way that it is, it doesn't suit every child. They're all different. So you've got some that might want to do trades. They don't want to go to year 12 through the mainstream education because it's not what they want. They might want to be a tradie, or, there should be pathways to TAFE. There should be supports provided where, kids are given meals in case they're hungry at home. And this is, Wadulars, like non-Aboriginal kids and kids in general, I'm speaking about, and then there needs to be supports put in place. Kids could be bullied, kids could be having problems at home, social justice issues, family fighting, community violence. What really needs to happen is they need to sit down with these kids and ask them themselves, what do you need? What is it that you want? What's your long-term goals that you have for yourself?
Deb, what do you think? I think it's a really good point. Really good point.
Yeah, agree with all of that, of course. And I've got to give a little plug to my sewing sister, Sue Atkinson, who's got a PhD in early years. And Sue's actually been involved in writing the possum skin pedagogy for the Victorian Education Department for early years and kindergartens. And there's some kindergartens in Victoria that are working in language. There's some specialist Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kindies and early learning centres, and there's also mainstream kindergartens that she's working with. And so we've got some really amazing thought leaders from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders around some of the changes and what we can do. Getting that implemented is the next stage. So Sue's been really involved in community practices with early years staff to work with them about, white fellas get scared in this space sometimes and don't go ahead.
Yeah.
So we're
I think, Deb, what you're saying, Deb, is really right. It seems to be a lot of really good things going on. And I think, AFL Sports Ready is another group that's helping out with Indigenous traineeships and things like that. And there's a lot of good little programs going. And Marianne, it's great to hear your passion, and just brings me back to my time when I was working a lot in Perth with White Lion and the guys down there. It was really good to be amongst community and seeing the great work and meeting people like yourself that are very passionate. And you must see that there's some really good examples of great work going on. And what we just need is to sort of grow that work and keep growing these programs that are making a difference, I suppose. Just get more of them.
No. That's right. And music and art programs are really good to engage kids too, Yeah. And they can be used as an incentive, for like, we can do this music program, we can do these arts programs, but we just need you to get these things here done just so that you can keep your grades up to finish to wherever it is you want to go from there, whether it's a TAFE course or, a trade or a traineeship or whatever. So we have Fluent over here, Joshua Eggington. He's a rapper, one of our Nyungar rappers, and he does a lot of good work in Kwinana with our kids, but not just there. He also does work with the kids in Banksia, and does a lot of work with his producer, Optimus. Scotty, he used to work with Eskimo Joe. So you've got a lot of these good music programs, but it comes back to the funding,
Yeah.
And so
what about that schools program, that sports program, Clontarf? Have you had much to do with them? They're doing a lot.
Clontarf does really, like my boys have gone through Clontarf. So Clontarf help, they provide, the kids help them get into traineeships, they get them job ready. They do the Keys for Life program, to help them get their learner's permit and their license. They provide funding to pay for certain things, so that kids aren't left, behind. They also have camps and incentives. They get them into the football programs as well. And they provide a lot of mentor support. you know, so and that's really good for the boys. And then we have the Deadly Sister Girls, which works with the girls through what used to be the David Wirapunda Foundation. So I think it's been changed to Wallich now, which is Eagle in Noongar.
Well, we're just about to wrap up the show, but want to ask each of you the top 5 tips that you want to give to our community members and listeners out there this evening. Deb, I'm going to start with you. What's your your first tip that you want to give to all our community members and listeners?
This can't wait. And I guess it goes to my, the longer we live in this country with such inequity and injustice, we're losing great Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Like we're actually, people's lives are on the line. So this is really important and needs to happen now. We can't let these things go untalked about and unactioned. And it goes to my point before about white fellas being scared about doing the wrong thing. And I just think, yes, I've made mistakes and I've learned from people and I've listened, and we've got to get in there. And one of my touchstones is to be led by a number of Aboriginal people in this space, and then listen to that, diversity of voices, and then see how we can support those changes happen.
Right. And Marianne, what's yours?
What's yours, Marianne?
So I agree. You've got a lot of non-Aboriginal researchers out there that do a lot of good work, and I think that if people have the capacity to support, communities to get change for what it is they need, well, I think that, they need to not be scared and just jump up and do it. But the most important thing is that you listen to the voices of the community, and you take away what they tell you, So people can't go in there telling them what to do. You need to listen. And my elders say, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as you speak.
That's
right.
That's a great thing to listen to the voices there. Ammo's just put a message up there, Kelly, about listening to voice. Just want to read that for us.
To create systemic change, the voice of First Nations people needs to be enshrined into Constitution. There is lots of great work happening and many amazing programs, but until this happens, our First Nations people remain unheard. This country needs to change, and community programs must be led by First Nations people.
Thanks, Ammo. And that sort of reinforces what you're talking about, Marianne, with your first point. And thank you for sharing that we must listen to Indigenous voices. It's a great one. Deb, what's your second one?
Well, just to go to that point, we've had really great advice and learnings from Aboriginal people in the Bring Them Home report, in, the Closing the Gap. We've been told a million times by Aboriginal people what needs to be done, and we don't do it. So we've got to hold people and programs to account, fund the stuff. How many of 90-something recommendations in the Bring Them Home report that's 30 years old now, isn't it, I think, Marianne? And we still haven't implemented them all. We still haven't implemented them. And if we did do those things, we would see structural changes in our judicial systems. And I just don't think we are listening.
All right, we're going to keep going. We've only got a couple of minutes left on the show. Marianne, what's your second one?
Marianne?
We need to implement the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody recommendations too, because then we might be able to lower the incarceration rate, stop deaths in custody, provide more support to people, rehabilitation, restorative justice, all that kind of stuff. There needs to be a real focus on that system, because mental health and emotional and social well-being also crosses over into that alongside deaths in custody in the justice system.
It's a big topic. We can spend a whole show on that. Deb, what's your third one? I'm sorry, we've only got 3 minutes left on the show, so
I just think we need to be thinking through where the power and accountability lies. And so, for the non-Aboriginal community, we can hold politicians to account. We can demand better in this space, and we don't.
Yes.
Really good.
And
point.
Aboriginal funding needs to be Aboriginal funding needs to be in control of Aboriginal hands and the right people.
Okay, all right. another point from you, Marianne. And your final point, Deb, we'll make this your final one.
Oh, it's what I said before. Cultural awareness is not enough for the non-Aboriginal community. They've got to be doing more than that. It's really important, and it's really important to listen.
More action, more action.
Yep.
Yeah.
And your final point, Marianne, to really lift the bar, what would you want to say?
Well, there needs to be more done than just enshrining a voice in the Constitution. The current framework that they have with the voice, I can't support. So I just want to make sure that people become fully informed before deciding what their decision should be. Just be aware that government always have an ulterior motive, and it's not always in the best interest of Aboriginal people.
Absolutely.
Okay, yep, good. It's good that we're hearing straight from you tonight, Marianne. And Deb, thanks for joining us from the Sewing Sisters. I don't know whether you can sew, Marianne. Can you sew at all?
Yes, we all taught how to sew. I can make clothes. I got a sewing machine and overlocker at home.
All right. Looks like you could join the Sewing Sisters when you're over in. You ever get to Melbourne, Marianne? Do you ever get to Melbourne?
Oh, every now and then I do. So my kids are Gundi Chamara. They related to the Austins and Roses over there.
Oh, you know
So you
Troy
got a
Austin?
lot that live in Melbourne.
You know Troy Austin and Thelma?
Yeah, well, they would all be my kids' dad's family. So my kid's pop is Lawrence Austin, baby Cass, the boxer.
There you go, eh? The old Fitzroy Stars gym over
Yep.
here in Melbourne.
Yeah, all the Austin and Rose
there you
mob.
go. There's a lot.
So
There'd be a lot of people
Archie
you and I
Roach.
know, but
Yeah. Well, Archie Roach, rest in peace, actually dedicated his album Charcoal Lane to my kid's pop's brother, old Jock there, rest in peace. Jock Austin.
Jock Austin, yep.
Yeah.
And he created the Fitzroy Stars gym down there. So Troy Austin is his son, and Thelma's his daughter. So lots of great history there and great people.
Yeah. Well, that's my kid's dad's first cousins.
Oh,
Yeah. So
small world.
yeah.
Small world. All
Yeah,
right,
well,
we're
Uncle
gonna have
Robbie
to bring this
Thorpe
to
and
an end.
I
It's
know
9
them all
o'clock
over there.
And the bell's going. So, Kelly,
Yeah.
it's been a great show. A few technical issues, but great show.
Yes.
Great to have you on, Marianne. Great to have you on, Deb and Kel.
Yeah, thank you.
Show, eh?
I had to get back to all these mob down here.
All right. Take care,
Thank you for
everyone.
joining, everyone.
All right. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
See you.
All right,
Thanks.
catch us.